Not to the camera.
I want to talk to you.
Me.
Okay.
We're going to have a conversation.
Sure.
Okay, not.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it okay if I sit here? Or should I move?
I wonder if you shouldn't sit over here too.
I think I should.
Yeah, in case you have a comment and he wants to make a comment back, he wouldn't look at you, he'd look at you here.
Oh, so you mean it would be okay for me to talk? Or?
Yeah, it's definitely okay for you to talk, but not while he's talking.
Oh, definitely. If you want, I probably won't say anything unless you. I mean, do you want to give me like this?
We'll stop, and if you have, you'll see how it'll work.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
I'll figure it out.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. I already asked you, I know I asked you, I think I asked you about your, okay. We're going to talk a little bit, we're going to start out jumping right in to the story of the French. I don't have enough coverage of the French. What role did the French play in the history of the Garifuna here on St. Vincent?
Very important question. I think that the French were the first colonizers. They came to the island first, and they made an impact on the island. They tried to colonize the island. However, the Caribs, they were defeated by the Caribs, and because...
You can speak a little bit louder.
Louder, okay.
Yeah.
And because they were defeated by the Caribs, they were saying if you can't beat them, you join them. So they became allies of the Caribs during the colonial wars. The evidence of the French being here, you can see there are several names of certain parts of the island that has a French origin. For example, Chateau Belair, which is one of the towns. Then you have Baroli, the French name. Then you have Petit Baudel. Then you have the highest mountain in the island is called Soufrière, which is also French. And other names, so Petit Bonhomme. So there are several evidences of the French influence in the island. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was before the English even arrived. It was the French that were.
Yes.
What did the French want to do here?
The French wanted to, well, the aim was to colonize. That was their objective, to colonize the island. And they wanted to have a plantation producing tropical products, etc., etc. But they were not very successful. I think after they were defeated by the Caribs, they created an alliance with them. You can live and let live. And I think that was the arrangement that they had between the Caribs and the French.
What was going on between the French and the English at the same time that they were coming here?
Right. At the same time, the same colonial history, they were vying for colonial dominance in the Caribbean, and they were searching for colonies in the Caribbean. So there was this conflict between the French and the English. And you know, there are certain parts of the Caribbean that has French origin. For example, Martinique, the French island, and there was always connections between Martinique and St. Vincent. Also St. Lucia. St. Lucia was in the hands of the French for a long time, and that was very important as far as Carib history is concerned, because St. Lucia is very close to St. Vincent, about 20 miles north of St. Vincent, so you can see the back and forth, you know, connection. So, but the objective of the French was naturally colonization. But they meet this fierce resistance from the Caribs, and I think their colonial ambitions were thwarted.
Okay. You said that the French, that St. Lucia is only 20 miles from
St. Vincent.
Here. So, given that, what kind of back and forth went on between the French?
Yeah, that is very, very crucial, because it was a French island, and the French were allies of the Caribs. There was constantly back and forth bringing supplies, troops, etc., to St. Vincent.
Who brought the troops to St. Vincent?
The French. The French
Brought the troops.
brought the troops to assist in helping the Caribs against the English.
Say it again, just like you just said it.
Okay.
In one sentence.
The French brought troops and supplies and logistics to assist the Caribs in fighting the English.
Okay, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to know about the French. Is there anything else I need to know about the French that you can think of that needs to be brought out? Basically, it's just that the French assisted the Caribs. They were defeated. All right.
I don't know, do you want to talk about that when they came, when the French came in was it 18 or 19, and they tried to take over the island? That story about this is one of the first stories about the black versus the yellow Caribs. There's, they said that what the colonial records say anyway is that one group of Caribs told the French that they wanted to drive out the Africans who had come, on the shipwreck.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why the French came over, and the French misinterpreted that. They thought that this was their chance to take over all of St. Vincent, so they landed all these troops. But when they landed, the Caribs who, supposedly invited them, they sided with the Africans, and they defeated the French.
Right, that's very important, right? That's a very important fact.
Yeah, I don't,
Maybe
are you running? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very crucial fact, crucial.
Me, not her.
Yeah, this would be it's a very crucial incident in the history of St. Vincent and Grenadines. The French were invited to St. Vincent, and there was allegedly friction between, allegedly between the black Caribs and the yellow Caribs. I don't really subscribe to that nomination. I think they were all Caribs. Okay, that's what they were called. I think the word black and yellow was invention by the colonizers to divide and conquer. Saying that the French were invited with some kind of intrigue and to drive out the black Caribs, as they say. But whenever there is a common enemy, the Caribs became a united force to fight a common enemy. Because it is not logical that you were invited here. The yellow Caribs were brought here. The yellow Caribs brought the Africans from allegedly the shipwreck. They were welcomed, etc. So it's very illogical that they're going to fight against some people who helped you and assisted you in your misery. So there might be as a family, there might be conflicts within the family. But when there's a common enemy, the unite themselves to fight a common enemy. So the French were somewhat deceived. Deception, you're very correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so there has been a lot of discussion about black, yellow, red Carib.
Right.
Can you comment on that?
But my comment is that the Caribs never call themselves, they never distinguish between them.
Yeah, I should do the same.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just need the bag. Okay, so can you comment? What I'm trying to say here is that there's been a lot of discussion about all these different tribes of Caribs. But over the course of this conference, we've really come to see that may not have been, there might not have been those divisions.
Those divisions, yes.
So can you talk about that?
Yeah. When I read the history of the documentation of the colonists who were here, they say Caribs. It was only maybe later on they may probably use the word.
Yeah.
We are doing an interview here. Sure, no problem. You want to stop for a second?
No, we'll stop.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, rolling.
Good. So we were talking about the distinctions, yellow, black, yeah, whatever they the pigmentation is. When I read the documents, they always say Caribs, and sometimes they spell the word C-H-A-R-I-B-S, Caribs. And there was no, in the very early time, there was no distinction among the family. You were Carib, whatever pigmentation that you were Carib. And I believe that the distinctions came in later on. And I think it was one ploy of the colonizers, mainly the English, to say black and yellow. So I think those are just artificial terms that's been used by the colonizer to divide and conquer.
Okay.
Divide and conquer. And the word Garifuna, that's also another new word that came into the picture. Kalinagos is the word that was given to the yellow Caribs, and it means peaceful. Siboney is another term that's been used. And the Kalinagos, that means a peaceful people.
So you just said that this term was given to the yellow Carib, so you yourself are making this distinction.
Explain to me what it means.
Well, you just said that the yellow Caribs were called the Kalinago. So in your mind, you still use the term yellow Carib or black Carib.
Well, no, but I don't. From my perspective, I don't use the word black and yellow. I just say Caribs and Garifuna. Maybe that's a new term. I use that term sometimes. I don't know how appropriate it might be, but I rarely use black Caribs and yellow. I don't use that. I say Caribs or Garifunas, which is a combination of the yellow and the black. And I think that may be an appropriate term. But the Kalinagos were the original Amerindians who came from the borders of the Orinoco River. Those original people, Kalinagos. So maybe if I do some more research in the word Garifuna, that might be a happy medium to unite the two people. But I prefer the word Caribs. That's from my perspective as an inclusive term. Because the Caribs themselves, whether they were black or yellow or whatever color they were, they call themselves Caribs. Even in Central America, they were called Caribs. They never called black Caribs. From my understanding, when I speak to the folks from Central America, they were called Caribs. And the word Garifuna is a word that came in a recent terminology. So we have to reconcile ourselves with this terminology. Amerindians, Siboney, Kalinagos, black Caribs, yellow Caribs, and all this terminology. We have to formulate an entity that how we can describe ourselves.
As a child growing up in Sandy Bay, how did you identify yourself, and how did others identify you?
They identify themselves as Caribs. There was no distinction there, and there were different types of people living in the village. There were people of black pigmentation, yellow pigmentation, in different types. And we never made any distinction within the village. The term black Caribs was when I read in the history, that's what I read in the history. But as far as the village itself was concerned, there was no distinction among the people, black, yellow, whatever it is. We were Caribs.
What village was this?
Sandy Bay Village.
In Sandy Bay.
Sandy Bay Village in St. Vincent and Grenadines. That was the headquarters, I would say, the largest concentration of the indigenous people of the island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
So when you were growing up, did you have much knowledge about yourself as a Carib? And if so, how did you learn about yourself?
There was not much knowledge because, as we have said in the past, that after the War of 1797, that the Caribs, quote Caribs, there was no black and yellow, whatever it is, what then was called Caribs. After the war, and in 1797, 2 years before Chartier was killed on the 14th of March, and then Duvalier continued the war for 2 more years, and then there was a surrender, and the surrender, one of the stipulations of the surrender was that the Caribs, some of the Caribs were to be shipped out, exiled to Central America, and they were shipped to Baliso, where there was a transshipment area, where they spent about 3 months, and almost half of them died. There was 5,000 who were shipped to approximately to Baliso, and about 2,000 or 3,000 died there. Others committed suicide. And the ones who remained were shipped to Rotan in Central America, and then migrated to Honduras, where there's the largest concentration of the Caribs from St. Vincent, or the Calingano, or the Garifunas from St. Vincent.
But you're a descendant of those who were not exiled. So
I'm a descendant.
Can you say that?
Yeah, I'm a descendant of the Caribs who were not exiled to Central America. And one of the stipulations of the treaty, that the ones who remained, that they should not practice the language, should not adhere to any elements of the culture, such as dancing, music, and folklore, and any element of the Carib civilization. That's one of the stipulations. You want to stay here, if you want to remain in Yurumein, you have to adhere on the pain of death. You have to adhere to those stipulations, or we may ship you out too. So that was the reason why there was no history in Sandy Bay, no history of dancing, etc. There were very, very rudimentary elements of the language. For example, I know a very, very old lady that knew a few words. For example, the word cat is called mesu, and she remembered that word. And the same word, when I speak to my colleagues in Central America, the word mesu exists. But that is the extent. There's extremely rudimentary remains of the language. There are some elements of the food that exist. For example, the cassava. Cassava exists, and that was the extent of the food and the language. But there was no history per se. The history that I learned was from the books that were written by the first book that I read in reference to history of the Caribs is a book called by The History of St. Vincent by a person called Ebenezer Duncan, that I read when I was in school, and it talks about the wars, the first Carib War, the second Carib War, etc., etc. And that was the extent of my knowledge of the Caribs. And we were somewhat, because of the colonial mentality, the colonials, the ones who lived there, they were British subjects in the before independence. They were all, we were brought up as Englishmen, so we had the English mentality. And because the English mentality persisted, it carried over to regard the Caribs as cannibals and all the derogatory terms that has been used to them. It is only recently that that paradigm has changed to recognize that these were bona fide heroes who protected the island.
So what was it in you that prompted you to look beyond Duncan?
I believe, I was very curious as a youngster, and I said there must be something that existed before existed. This is not all my history. So what I tried to do was to get some information. What they say in the book is that the Caribs were exiled to Central America. And in my opinion, what I thought was that these people were lost. I thought that they were lost. There was no, they probably intertwined and mingled in the communities where they were exiled, and there was no trace of anything. I thought it was extinct altogether. And it was a revelation when I came to Los Angeles. And when I told them that I am from St. Vincent, it was like a light bulb that opened up. And they were extremely fascinated that I am from St. Vincent. Yurumein is the call. That word Yurumein is sacred in the history of the diaspora. And they start speaking the language, and they had a misconception that all the people, all the folks in St. Vincent were Garifunas, or Caribs, or Garifunas, or whatever is politically correct at the time. But they were able to speak the language, the dances, and all the whole paradigm of the civilization. And that was it. And that prompted me to look a little further into the history, the culture, the dances, the traditions of the diaspora. And also too, I also was very interested in the American Indian, the Indians in South America, and also the American Indians, because my people, we said we were Indians, so I had some kind of a connection with the American Indians because of their history. And I also went back and looked into the history of Mesoamerica, the Inca civilization, and the civilization. And I said, you know, because it's in our blood, there's something, we were not really lost people. These people of Indian origin had a civilization too, in Mesoamerica. You know, the Mayas, the Incas. So we're not that people who has been disenfranchised. There is some, in our genetic makeup, we had some history, some kind of background, some civilization that existed.
Okay.
And sure.
So do you remember the very first Garifuna that you met and what that interaction was like? Do you remember that very first, can you recall that very first interaction when you as a Vincentian met the first person that you knew was of Garifuna, that was that exiled brother? You remember that?
It was...
Wait, just a second. Are you coming in, or
Come in?
if you're going to come in, we're going to stop. The question is, do you remember the very first time you met a person of Garifuna descent, and how did you feel, and what was that interaction like?
Yeah, I remember the first time, and that person was from Belize. And when we...
Say, I remember the first time I met a Garifuna.
Yeah, I remember the first time I met a Garifuna, or Carib, whatever is politically correct, that he felt that I could speak the language of the ancestors. And he was extremely surprised that I didn't know a single word. And he was somewhat disappointed. And it was quite an experience. So I made at that particular moment, I tried to make a desperate attempt to at least learn some of the language. And from that meeting, I attended every meeting that has any relevance to the Carib events. I try to attend them. But their conception that everyone in St. Vincent were Garifunas or Caribs.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. So then you went to Baliso this trip, and you were interacting with. Since that time, you've been, interacting with a lot of people. I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. But what struck me about our interview in Los Angeles,
yes.
what really blew my mind,
yes.
was the fact that you, as a medical doctor, take care of people from Central America who are of Garifuna descent.
Yes.
How emotional that must be for you.
That is extremely, heartwarming and emotional, because these are my people, and they come to me, and I can speak a little bit of the language. Since then, I can speak, and I would speak to them when they come to me. I would greet them in the language. I would say, Buiti Binafi, Idi Bienge, and they would continue the conversation in Garifuna, and I would try my very best to respond as best as I can, but they just light up. It is such an amazing experience that here they are, and we reconnect again through physically via medicine and via our tradition and the culture and things like that. It is something that is, it's amazing.
And who are these people? These people are
These are my people exiled from Yurumein.
these are your patients.
My patients, my patients who are Garifunas or Caribs or Kalinagos, whatever you want to call them. But they were my patients, and it's very rewarding to take care of them because I can relate to some of the.
I just want to hear if I can hear them. Go ahead and talk.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I can relate to them in a very cultural fashion because the kind of food that they eat, for example, cassava, which is called yereba, that is the kind of food that I ate when I was a youngster. So I know exactly what they're talking about. We call it, in America, we call it cultural competence, because you understand the culture of the people that you're dealing with. Okay, so that's another element of the interaction with this group of my brothers and sisters who are now living in Los Angeles area.
So you went to Valley So with some of the. Was that your first time to Valley So?
That was my first time in Valley So.
How come? As a child, you didn't hear about Valley So?
I heard about Valley So.
As a child?
As a child. No. Well, I know of Valley So because of my history, of my geography, but I did not understand the significance of Valley So. I know of it. I know of all the Grenada Islands, including Mustique, Beckway, Canawan, Union Island, etc., etc. But the Valley So, I didn't realize how significant it was in the history of our people.
You mean when you were living on St. Vincent?
When I was living in St. Vincent, I didn't understand. I know vaguely I heard about it, but the significance did not come into the picture until recently when people talk about the exile to Valley So. And so it is something that is taking more of an importance as time goes on.
So how did you feel when you went on this trip to Valley So? What was tell me about that trip.
It was a physically and an emotionally, physically and emotionally exhausting. Okay? From the physical point of view, it was extremely difficult to have access to the island. So I could imagine in 1797 how it must have been. And that is from the physical point of view. And then the emotional point of view too, when I landed and I see how inhospitable the terrain was, I've wondered how in the world can people live on this barren island? What was it in them that made them survive? I took the opportunity to go around the island. I walked quite a bit around the island, and maybe it's very symbolic. As I was walking through the forest, to the shrubs, I got a few scratch marks, and I left some of my blood. Very symbolic. I think maybe the ancestors designed as such. My blood with the scratch marks, and I have them right here on my arms. It's almost healing right now, but some of my blood was spilled on Valley So. So I think it was very symbolic that this happened to me. And so the thing that struck me, how is it that they can live? How did they make it? Very interesting too is that one of the gentlemen showed me something like a little prison-like, the remnants of a prison that was there. I don't know if you guys saw it. There was like some relics of a prison, and he said that this was part of the internment that was there.
No, I didn't
So
see it. Where was
he showed me one of the
as a Vincentian from Sandy Bay, and
Right.
Arrow from Sandy Bay.
right. So I'm sort of- Hello.
Yes, hi, Dr. Gill. Sorry.
That meeting, no problems. Okay, so the medical staff meeting.
Good weekend.
Well, thank you. I will be there. Bye-bye. They reminded for a medical staff meeting on Monday. That's
In
part
Los
of
Angeles.
Los Angeles,
And you're 10,000.
Central Missouri.
Take it
Amazing.
away.
Yes. So we were talking
I
about.
was wondering how you felt as a person from Sandy Bay, given your history,
Yes.
and given the fact that you didn't even know about this place so much as a child growing up, and
Right.
here you were on Valley So, and here were these Hondurans and Belizeans, descendants of the Caribs, and you weren't there actually.
No,
Because there was a whole ceremony.
There was a whole ceremony, but I decided I wanted to have an experience. I decided to go off and see exactly what is it. So I broke off from the crowd. I should have got back a little earlier, but I toured the island. I walked around the island, and I don't know whether I saw bones. I don't know whether they were human bones or not, but I didn't want to be sacrilegious and take the bones. But I saw remnants of bones, maybe animals. I don't know what they were, but I walked around the island.
So did you have any specific thoughts about the people from Honduras and Belize who were there?
Oh, I thought they were amazing. I thought they were very ecstatic, because in the dreams and the traditions of their grandfathers and grandmothers, the stories came down from their ancestors about Chatouille. And what is very interesting in the diaspora, the name Chatouille is revered among all of the diaspora. The word Chatouille is like magic to them, some mythical figure that exists in their minds. And this is fascinating.
Why do you think that is?
Because of his leadership, and because he was the one that they remembered. You know, when after the diaspora, they remembered this great leader. That's very important. However, from my perspective, there were other extremely significant leaders, such as Jean Baptiste. And if you were to go to Sandy Bay, a lot of the people, the last name is Baptiste. It's fascinating. Okay, as a matter of fact, my grandmother was a Baptiste. Okay, but about 90% of the village, 80% they are French names, Baptiste, Lavier. Okay, so
why did Chatouille emerge as a leader? Explain why he was the chief of chiefs.
I think he was a linguist, was able to speak French, probably English, and also his native language. And he was a great commander. He was a strategist. Okay, and I think he was elected by all the local chiefs to lead the battle against the English.
What do you mean he was a strategist?
He was a strategist because he fought. The war was carried on for almost 25 years, from 1772, as a matter of fact, and carried on until 1797. So it was a long period of warfare, and one of the longest battles that they fought. And as a matter of fact, he was able to devise guerrilla warfare. And I think maybe that was the first time guerrilla warfare was fought. Because if it's a conventional war, they probably decimated many years ago. Most guerrilla wars go on for a long period of time. Even in present day history, you have guerrilla warfare going on for many years. And I think that's what they fought. That was the kind of warfare that was carried out at that particular period. A lot of guerrilla warfare and a lot of
Can you imagine Chatouille interacting? What was his relationship with the French?
I think his relationship with the French was quite friendly, because your enemy, there's a saying that's the friend of my enemy is my friend. Something that goes say. Maybe you want to elaborate. So the English.
My enemy is my friend.
Yeah?
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That is correct. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay. So the enemy was the English. And so we're allies, and we're gonna fight together. And I also believe too, it was the period of the French Revolution that things were going on. This equality system was going on at that particular epoch. And I think that that must have been motivated the French to be allies with the Caribs. But there was a good relationship with them.
Okay, so Chatouille.
But as I said before, there were several chiefs. There was Jean Baptiste. There was Dufont. There was Dufont. There was Toussaint. There was Thunder, and there was Emmanuel, and there was Duvalier. People don't stress Duvalier. I think he was a great strategist too. We don't know much about him, but there are certain parts of St. Vincent have the name Duvalier, and there's a place called Chateauguay too, and I think that we should name Sandy, but not known as Sandy, called Chateauville. That's my political take on that. Chateauville.
So at the same time that all this resistance was going on, there was the American independence. So just to try to make it very clear, you had the French, who were allies of the Caribs, and then fighting the British. So can you just say that real clearly? The French were allies of the Caribs, and they were in order to fight the British.
Yes.
And then explain a little bit about what else was going on in the Caribbean, the American Revolution. How are the Carib Wars associated with those other wars?
The French, after being defeated by the Caribs, became their allies. As a matter of fact, they respected the Caribs so much that they fought under the leadership of Chateauguay. Now, at the same time this war was going on in 1774, 76, etc., that same particular area, the 13 colonies of America were fighting for their independence. The colonies that were in the tropics, the Caribbean, these colonies produced some very exotic products, such as ginger, spices, nutmegs. The colonies in the tropics, for example, in the Caribbean, they produce very exotic and very rare products that were extremely important for the English and the Europeans. Sugarcane, all these things. Now, in America, the climate is very similar to England, so the products were different. Okay, so the colonies in the Caribbean were extremely important for British trading. So what happened? The English during the war, the American Independence War, the English recognized the significance of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They dispatched 2 regiments to fight against the Caribs in St. Vincent.
So just explain that the British withdrew or took 2 regiments from America and sent it down to St. Vincent to fight the Caribs. Say it like that.
Yes.
Because the way you're saying it, it's confused. It's
Okay.
a little confusing.
Okay. The English took 2 regiments from North America to fight the Caribs in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Perfect.
Okay.
That's right.
And we can infer from that incident that the Caribs of St. Vincent somewhat indirectly assisted in the American War of Independence.
Okay.
So they played a role not only locally but internationally.
And do you know much about Victor Hugh? Do you know anything about him?
Victor Hugh.
Yeah, we talked about that at the conference. He was in St. Lucia at the time.
Guadeloupe. He came in 1794 to Guadeloupe to emancipate the slaves, to change Guadeloupe from royalist government to a free republic. So he emancipated the slaves, and then my understanding is that he then he called the Caribs. He said that they were his friends and loyal allies, and he sent some troops from Guadeloupe in 1795 to St. Vincent to help the Caribs in the war.
That is something that is new. Victor Hugo?
Victor Hugo.
Victor Hugo.
Yes.
He was a Frenchman.
He was a Frenchman,
I see.
but he came and he emancipated the slaves in Guadeloupe.
Guadeloupe.
And he formed a new army of, Frenchmen, white Frenchmen, but
Yes.
also free blacks.
Blacks.
And so, and then this part of this army came to St. Vincent in 1795 to fight.
To fight.
Yes.
Because
Chateaubriand asked for an alliance.
asked for help.
Yes.
For assistance.
Yes. Yes.
So, can you say, this is real specific, Chateaubriand, went to Guadeloupe to get help from the French. You don't have to say Victor Hugo if you don't want to. He went to Guadeloupe to get help as well, and the French, both the black and the free blacks and the whites came and fought with the Caribs against the British.
Okay. Chateaubriand went or sent emissaries to Guadeloupe to get assistance from the Frenchmen, the white Frenchmen, and the freed slaves to come to St. Vincent to assist in the War of Liberation.
That's good. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay. So, and then there was also a war going on in Haiti, right? There was.
Very interesting, and I'm trying to make the connections here. There was a liberation war that's going on in Haiti around that same time, and this is speculation, and it could be that the French in Haiti heard about these indigenous people who had defeated the French. So I believe it gave them inspiration to rise up against the French. Toussaint Louverture was the leader of that rebellion, and they defeated the French. And I believe they got inspiration from the Caribs of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Here is a people who is indigenous can defeat these white Frenchmen. We can do it too. And I think that inspired them. And also very important too that I was able to recall is that during the Exodus, the ship, the Experiment, which was one of the ships that took the Caribs to Roatan, they landed in Jamaica for provisions. And allegedly, some escaped and inspired the Maroons in Jamaica to create a resistance against the British. And the Maroons were part of the war. You know who they were?
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So really there was like these fires, I visualized.
Exactly.
So talk about how you can visualize that there was these explosions.
Yes, there was all these flares of independence, the flames, and these flames were ignited by the Caribs in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So it has an international flavor, which includes the War of Independence, the Maroons, the Haitian Revolution, etc., etc. And also there is some influence among the neighboring islands. What was being said is that St. Vincent was the Mecca of freedom. And when there was an uprising against the slaves, against the colonial masters, the escaped slaves would come to St. Vincent and they'd be welcomed by the Caribs. So we do have this inter-island connection with St. Vincent. And it is also important that there are some names that St. Vincent has and the other islands have that are very similar. For example, names like Eustace, names like Valentine, names like some British names. And I think they were derived from the British colonies, and these were excluded because, as we know, the slaves derived their name from their colonial masters. So names that are in St. Vincent, they have the similar names in the neighboring islands of St. Vincent. So there was this inter-island connection with St. Vincent.
Very good. Let me see. I think that covered that point really well.
Okay.
And then the only other thing that I would like to get from you is, I already talked about Valley, so I want to talk a little bit more about Châteauroux. Basically, there's a section in the rough cut where I have to come in and say Châteauroux was respected by people. You know, he was well respected by people all over. And then you know, he met Leith in an ambush and he was killed. So how do I want you to say that? I think what's your theory about how Châteauroux died?
Well, my theory, or what has been said of his death.
Say that again. The theory of what Châteauroux is. Mention his name.
Okay. The theory of Châteauroux's death, Paramount Chief, is Right Honorable Châteauroux. The circumstances surrounding his death is shrouded in mystery. I want to make that statement here. In 1795, there were two fronts. Duvalet, I think, was on the leeward front, and Châteauroux was on the windward front, if you remember. And they planned to meet in Dorsetshire Hill and capture the town of Kingston, as it was called then. Apparently, Châteauroux arrived the first, and the battle ensued between the Caribs and the English. And at midnight on the 14th, allegedly, Châteauroux was slain. As I said, the circumstances shown his death is still mysterious. There are several theories as to what transpired. One, there was a hand-to-hand battle with Châteauroux and Lieutenant Leith. In that situation, he was killed. I have a different version. My version that if you have a strong guy, a leader, and a hand-to-hand battle with an Englishman, I am sure that Châteauroux would have overpowered him. If there was a sword fight, a battle with weapons, that maybe the English had an advantage with the weapon, the sword. Whether he was shot, we don't know. We know that he was killed. The other theory is that there was an ambush. He was ambushed on the 14th. And what is very interesting, in many circumstances, when you overcome your enemy from the English, they will take your body and parade your body around. You know, say, here is Châteauroux, he's dead. He will never walk the earth again. As recently someone said that. okay, he would never walk the earth again. Here is his body, and they would parade his body around for everyone to see. That never occurred. So the mystery that is existing right now is, where is the body of Châteauroux? Okay, we don't know. We know where Leith was buried. We don't know. And that is something that we have, that's part of the mystery and the aura surrounding Châteauroux.
And so today there's a lot of, we just went to the church.
Yes.
There's a lot of, you want to speak about how all the English are proudly memorialized?
Yes. I recently visited the Anglican church, which was built in 1720. That is in a very early period of colonization. And it is very striking to see a lot of the plaques were all English governors, lawyers, and members of the aristocracy that was present in the Anglican church. And there is no mention, which is probably logical, of Châteauroux, indigenous people. They were all English colonists, governors, etc., but no mention of the indigenous people.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see if there's anything else. Can you think of anything else, or is there anything else that you wanna, I think we've covered most of everything. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
And this is just maybe speculations, and I think we covered some of them already, in reference to the shipwreck. Would you want, I think you know about the second tale, but you want me
I
to?
did mention that, but part of the confusion that, since people have been watching the film,
Yes.
some of the confusion or some of the questions that I've had was, okay, so first of all, if they were exiled, who are the people that are left on St. Vincent? And how, like what happened, and yet, what is the current population of St. Vincent? Are they descendants, if they're all black, most people here are black, where'd they come from? Go
ahead, sorry,
So
finish it.
if all the people who had been black Caribs have been exiled, how do you have a black population on St. Vincent today?
Well, my version of that incident, or that particular explanation of what transpired, is that I'll go with the shipwreck, or alleged shipwreck, in the 35, I think it was.
We don't know, right?
Well, I don't think any date is
Yeah,
accurate.
but it was allegedly different day, allegedly 1635, I think, when the shipwreck occurred, and the ship was carrying Africans to, I think it was a Portuguese ship, was carrying Africans to Cuba. And it's very important to realize they were not slaves. They were Africans. And according to the shipwreck, according to the story, the shipwreck, and the Africans were chained. How in the devil in the world can chain people from a shore? It doesn't make sense. There are different theories, and I have some of the theories too, is that there was a mutiny in the ship, that the Africans killed the crew and free themselves and swam ashore, or whatever, they use the boats and swam ashore, whatever. Okay, that's a theory that is logical. Other theory that is quite prominent is that the Caribs, people have freedom. They love freedom like they love the air. The freedom was so important in their lives, and anyone who was searching for freedom, they were able to assist them. And apparently, they probably saw this, they heard about this nefarious trade of slavery, and they realized that this ship had black people in them, and they went ashore, they went on board the ship, slay the crew, free the Africans, not slaves, brought them ashore as brothers. You're my brothers, you are freedom seekers, and we're going to welcome you to our island as free men. Second theory. The third theory is that the woman who was on board the ship, and this is for the woman's perspective, the crews had a habit of the women entertaining the men of the ship. And something transpired. They probably kill the crew and then free the Africans who are below. So those are certain theories, but this shipwreck theory is somewhat, somewhat. There are also speculations that Africans were here in the island of St. Vincent. I don't have any evidence to the effect. I know there were Africans in Mesoamerica, the old Meccas, etc., etc. You can look at the features and see that they were African origin. I know of that. But as far as Africans being there in the island of St. Vincent, I don't have any possibility, but I don't have any evidence to that effect.
So one of the things that came up at the conference that was interesting is that the theory, maybe you want to explain just the theory that the shipwreck was a myth, right?
Right. One thing that, we spent a long time talking about this at the conference, a couple of the papers, just that the theory of the shipwreck is a colonial myth that had the main purpose of it was to, disenfranchise the Caribs, because if the British and the French could say that the black Caribs were really Africans who shipwrecked on St. Vincent, they could say that the Black Caribs are not really indigenous to the island, not native to the island, and therefore had no legal claim to the land of St. Vincent. So that shipwreck story basically was a myth to justify the British takeover of St. Vincent and to make them to, delegitimize the Caribs' claim to the land.
You're talking about the black, well, we all know that the indigenous people that they have claim to the land. We know that the
Yes,
indigenous
people who are
Amerindians.
indigenous, yes.
Yes.
But the shipwreck story,
Yes.
basically, in the British mind, proved that the Caribs are not indigenous.
Black
to them,
Caribs.
The Black
That anybody-
Caribs.
That anybody of African descent was not indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
That they were not indigenous and therefore could not claim rights to the land. So
Mm-hmm.
if Africans were shipwrecked and they became Black Caribs, they weren't really indigenous.
But-
They
but-
were
but-
Africans.
But if you, I'm sure that I'm not sure, I know that there was intermarriage with the Amerindians and the Africans who came aboard. And in America, as you know, if there's an ounce of Indian in you, or whatever it is, a portion of blood in you, that you can claim to be Indian, there's a certain percentage. So I'm sure that most of the Africans who came aboard, that they're married to the indigenous people, and they must have some element of claim. So that's my legalistic, my view in reference to being disenfranchised, because there were intermarriage, a significant amount of intermarriage among the indigenous people and the Africans who were here, who came aboard, wherever they came from, whether it's a shipwreck or whether they came as slaves or whatever it was, that there's some element of legitimacy because of the intermarriage that existed between the two people.
So once the people were exiled, the Garifuna, the Caribs were exiled, how did the Black population regenerate here on?
Well, there was slavery. Slavery existed in St. Vincent. Okay,
For how many years?
but the slavery.
How many years did slavery exist?
We had full-blown slavery existed from 1797 until 1830, when there was emancipation. Okay, but there was slavery before that time. There were Africans who were brought here as slaves, some by the French, I think it were, some mainly by the English. Okay, prior to, but the slavery that was practiced here was not as probably as ruthless as it was in other islands, because they were constantly fighting these indigenous people, even prior to the advent of the African. They were constantly fighting against the colonizers. Okay, so whatever slavery existed here, it was because they had to divert their attention, divert their attentions to fighting the indigenous people. So it was not probably as brutal as it was supposed to be.
So the British had to divert their attention from slavery.
Exactly.
So say that.
Yeah, the British had to divert their attention from the slavery to fighting the Caribs. So that's another interesting fact, interesting phenomena in the history of St. Vincent.
So can you say that there was only 30-year period?
I think it's about from 1797. I said that's that's 3 years. So that's about 33 years of full-blown slavery that was here, because the emancipation from the English colonists was in 1830. So 1797, when the war was over, that's 3 years plus. So 33 years of full-blown slavery. Prior to that, the English had to divert their attention in fighting the Caribs. So we didn't have that harsh, that type of thing.
So can you explain what during those years of slavery, the British brought over 18,000? I think I don't know how many, but
yes.
But they brought more slaves, more Africans over, so the descendants of those are the Creoles that live here today.
Exactly.
Can you explain that?
Yes, prior to 1797, I'm sure that the French had some slaves, and the English brought slaves here, and they are the Creoles, as we say, that are now living in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Because the Caribs.
Say it again,
Sure.
sorry. Say it one more time
Right.
so that it's clear, so
Clear.
I can edit it. Which is that, after the Caribs were exiled, the British brought,
Yes,
thousands of
after the
Africans.
war.
Hold on, wait till
Sure,
I'm finished.
sure.
Brought thousands of Africans as slaves. Yes, go ahead.
Because even before 1797, there were already thousands of slaves.
Right, he mentioned that though. He said
Right.
the French brought
French
slaves.
brought
Well,
them.
the French and the British.
And the British,
In
yes.
1763, there were, I think the number was around between 2,000 and 4,000 French slaves. And then the British brought several thousand more before 1795.
Okay, so maybe you could just say before the Carib